Ms. Jessica Vaughan is the Policy Director at the Center for Immigration Studies. She's been with the Center since 1991, where her area of expertise is administration and implementation of immigration policy. Prior to joining the Center, Ms. Vaughan was a Foreign Service Officer with the U.S. State Department, and she holds a master's degree from Georgetown and a bachelor's degree from Washington College in Maryland. Now recognize Ms. Vaughan for her testimony.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Of course, no one wants to see people mistreated in detention, but this initiative goes too far and is a waste of taxpayer dollars that is motivated not by a genuine need for reform, but as part of a larger strategy to trivialize immigration law enforcement and minimize the consequences of illegal immigration, which imposes enormous fiscal, economic, national security, and public safety burdens on American communities. It's just wrong to ask Americans to foot the bill for the Obama administration programs that seek to help illegal aliens game the system. For example, as part of this detention reform initiative, DHS has set up hotlines and special advocates for illegal aliens to complain about their treatment. As in any large detention system, abuses occur and are dealt with. But at this point, the people who really need a hotline and a special advocate are the ones who have been the victims of the illegal acts committed by illegal aliens. While critics of immigration law enforcement like to call them concentration camps, in reality, immigration detention centers have always been softer than other detention centers. With their turf soccer fields, juice bars, satellite TV, and polo shirt-clad resident advisors, the descriptions of the brand new facility in Karnes City, Texas sounds more like a college campus, not like a temporary holding place for people who have violated U.S. laws. Now, I'm not here to suggest that DHS start housing detainees in tents in the desert, but the new Karnes facility costs $32 million to build. That's more than twice as expensive per bed as another new facility that was built not too long ago in Farmville, Virginia. It's reasonable to ask why the new facility, built according to the new standards, costs so much more, and how this compares to other options, such as housing detainees at local correction centers. How can DHS justify these facilities and services, considering that the vast majority of detainees are there only for a short period of time? The average length of stay for a so-called non-criminal of Mexico or Central America is 10 to 21 days, just long enough for travel documents to be issued and flights to be arranged. And a large share of these ICE detainees, Mexicans who are apprehended by the Border Patrol, stay only 12 hours. ICE turns over groups of 100 of these illegal aliens twice a day. The only reason that they're in detention at all is for the purpose of padding ICE's year-end removal statistics. For others, mainly in the interior, these centers are really just a brief way station in the Obama administration's massive catch and release program. Under current policies, also known as prosecutorial discretion, if they are not a mandatory detainee and have not yet been convicted of a crime, they're whisked back onto the street, often with a work permit. Many of the small number who remain for long periods are there because they're refusing the option of quick return and choosing to challenge their deportation or seek relief. Unfortunately, too often they are given false hope by advocacy groups who, under the new standards, get increased access to detainees. The humane thing to do is to process them more expeditiously so that they can get back home. An increasing number who choose to stay in detention in the hopes of getting permission to stay are illegal arrivals who are taking advantage of the administration's new lenient policies that reward people who express fear of return to their home country. They're usually assisted in this claim by NGO advocates who put on regular briefings in detention centers as called for in the new standards. After the application process, they're released with a work permit and notice to appear at some future date. These applications have increased 500% since the new policies were adopted. Advocates for illegal aliens are quick to point out that a large share of the individuals in detention are classified as non-criminals. This is not because they're harmless. It's usually because local authorities often will drop charges against illegal aliens in the expectation that ICE will take care of their problem by detaining and removing them. So this population of so-called non-criminals in reality includes any number of unsavory and dangerous characters. Convicted or not, ICE still has the responsibility to remove them. Putting them in a center with standards that are too soft may put detention officers, resident advisors, and other detainees at risk, and releasing them back into our communities puts everyone at risk. The majority of aliens who are not detained while in proceedings will fail to appear for their hearings or will ignore orders to depart. And the number of absconders is now more than 700,000, which is a 28% increase over 2008. A huge number of them abscond from local criminal proceedings, too. One recent case illustrates what happens when ICE looks for ways to release rather than detain people who have been arrested. Last September, they released a man in Chicago who was charged with 42 counts of child molestation, including incest and rape. He was supposedly being monitored electronically, but like many thousands before him, he's now has not been seen since. There are thousands of other cases that we can point to that are similar to this, but for now, since my time's expired, I will await your questions.
Thank you. And I just quickly turn to Ms. Vaughan then, and I ask you to flesh out your comment on that ICE looks for ways to release rather than to detain.
Well, I've seen, the policies now in place, the guidelines for ICE agents, ICE removal officers in particular, is to hold only those as a priority who have been convicted of a crime. And that policy overlooks the reality of how our criminal justice system plays out, and that many of these individuals are not going to be convicted unless they are held, because they stand a chance of fleeing before their proceedings can occur, both their criminal proceedings and also their immigration proceedings. So that's why that policy puts the rest of us at risk when people who are released back into the community have the opportunity to go on to commit other crimes.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughan.
Holiday on ice. Ms. Vaughan, do you know what that means?
It's a reference to a film. I believe it means that it's a reference to the perceptions, public perceptions of what some of the conditions may be in some of these facilities.
I'm not aware of it. I have not heard this kind of discussion. Could you describe to me what is meant by that? What conditions are you talking about?
Well, I can't speak to what went into the naming of the hearing. I have seen some accounts in news media reports, and I've also visited a facility myself. So I have a reasonable sense of what the conditions are.
What did you see?
Pardon me?
What did you see when you visited a facility?
What I saw was a surprisingly relaxed atmosphere. This was a facility that ICE leased space in from a county detention center up in the Northeast, where the detainees had pretty free access within the facility and access to each other. They had meals that were brought in by a woman who cooked them in her home. What I saw was a pretty well-rounded meal of breaded chicken, mixed vegetables, and some mashed potatoes. They were on a first-name basis with the officers who were in charge of security at the facility. Most of them, actually, we were told, were requesting to be housed in that facility rather than being sent to places that were closer to where their families were. I think because it was smaller and a little bit different type of setting. They didn't seem to be, that they accepted their detention because they knew that they were in the country illegally and they were awaiting their removal.
Yeah, but they had no choice. They had been detained, is that right?
Right. Oh, I'm sure they would rather not be.
They were not there voluntarily.
No, but they also knew that they had, the reason for their detention was because they were
but
in
I want to
violation
talk
of
about
U.S.
the
law.
holiday on ice and the conditions that this title refers to. And so you had people who were relaxed. That means they were not screaming or crying or running around or fighting or anything, but they were just ordinarily calm people who happened to be detained. Is that correct?
Well, most of them were in there for drug violations.
Is there anything, could you describe to me what you think would be wrong with being relaxed and a little bit sane? Is something wrong with that?
No, although this is a number of years before the new standards were put into place. So
they had access to each other. What do you mean, families? that the mother, father, children could talk to each other?
Well, they were able to have visitors. They seemed to appreciate our visit because the purpose of it was to get a sense of what the conditions were for them in detention.
So, did you, on your visit, did you determine that the conditions were luxurious and extravagant and a holiday on ice, or just kind of an ordinary thing with some woman who cooked some food and brought it in? It wasn't catered by a restaurant or any. What was extraordinary or extravagant about these conditions?
Well, I was surprised, actually, that it was as relaxed as it was, considering that the local officers may not have had good information about who these people were or what all was in their background, because this was before the era of secure communities and biometrics-based background checks. So I remember thinking that they were potentially at risk because it was so relaxed.
But they didn't demonstrate that they were violent, or they were about to attack anybody, or that they were fighting. They didn't demonstrate any of that. You just
Not
thought
during
maybe
our
they
visit.
should have, because they had records of some kind, and you were surprised that they were not violent or fighting or that kind of thing. But I guess the bottom line is you did not observe extravagance, did you?
I wouldn't call it extravagance. No, it was more kind of Mayberry-ish like atmosphere.
So you think that's too nice for a detainee?
I would have left that up to the people who were in charge of running that facility. It seemed a little bit relaxed to me.
I know you
knowing
keep
what
talking
can
about it
happen.
being relaxed, and I'm not so sure what you're referring to. And what I'm trying to find out is what this holiday on ice is, because it implies that there's some kind of extravagance and people want to be there, they're having a great time, they're having a vacation, but having just talked with you, I don't think that's the case.